Terry, where do you get your
Yes.
stories?
Stories, fiction, nonfiction,
I'll leave it open ended. Where do you get your stories?
stories. Uh, People.
How do they deliver them to you? You just go talk to people.
Yeah, I push the issue.
Can you
I
can you
love
imagine if your answer was monkeys or birds? How are you gonna get a story out of a monkey or a bird?
that. That would be really, really cool.
I mean, I guess you could watch them and observe what they do.
Yeah, but that's not a story. That's not their perspective. That's an observation.
I mean, you could make your story based on you could walk outside and tell a story. There were these two foxes playing in the creek outside my house. Frolicking foxes. I mean, that was a story. It wasn't like there was no beginning, middle, or end to the story, but I had the story in my mind of why these foxes were frolicking.
And
It was a very short story. So just, hey, look at these foxes, they're frolicking. More of a vignette than
vignette, a
than
salvo,
a what?
a salvo.
Is that like a one shot
Yeah,
type of story?
it's like an intro, a
So how do you get
little
this?
little
How do
bit.
you press the issue with something? You're like, hey, I'm Terry. Tell me a story.
Just ask questions. First off, people are really, really receptive to talking about themselves, and that's not. I don't mean that negatively. It's just people are interested in. They know themselves well, so that's a comfortable topic of conversation.
Do you find
So
those stories well crafted when you're
no,
asking somebody about them? Yeah, exactly.
no,
No, not at
not at
all.
all. And some high percentage of them are very boring, but I still like to listen because there's something in there. There's typically something in there that's interesting if you stay with it and ask the right questions. Now, in in situations like with Soren, who you met, or you, or a variety of other sources, turf sciences guy. Um, Somebody has something interesting to say, I can listen all day. I love it. It's very satisfying to hear interesting stories. And what I've found is a lot of times, even if the conversation starts, if a story starts off as a conversation about oneself, um, most people venture out into topics or ideas, and that's where I get interested. I don't, you know, I'm not interested in like,
Isn't every story just an avenue to break down the big stuff into bite-sized pieces that we can actually digest?
I hadn't thought of it like that, but that's it's plausible.
You don't watch movies mostly.
Real rare, very rare.
You don't read novels, as I
Uh,
also do not.
I just can't get into novels. I've done a few, like Kurt Vonnegut.
Yeah,
I like a lot. There are some here and there that I really enjoy, but as a practice, I can't read novels.
yeah. Kurt Vonnegut is the perfect book when you're ready to commit a 25-page read. Really, fits in your pocket. You know, every sentence is a poem in its own way, and yet it's not dense. Guy's a master storyteller. This is years back. Maybe I'll go read a Kurt Vonnegut book. It's been a long time since I read a Kurt Vonnegut story.
Go with Galapagos.
The book
Yeah,
is that how many pages is that? Like 70,
it's a
75?
lot. It's a bunch.
Is it thick?
It's thick.
Like, am I going to be able to take this paperback and stick it into my regular sized rear pocket of my pants?
No,
That might be too much of
I
a
need
commitment.
I need you to commit to something. That's where we're going to land at today. I
On a
need you to
book? Commit
something,
to a book? I got
something.
a book. But it's not exactly a story.
I see new things on the wall.
This is Rick Rubin's book. It's called The Creative Act, A Way of Being. Rick Rubin is an extremely storied music producer.
Yeah, I've got mixed feelings about Rick Rubin, and it's not his.
he's,
I've
he's,
got a bone to pick with Rick Rubin.
what did he do to you?
He
Like
didn't.
too much. He made too much popular music.
So it's not really his fault, but it kind of makes me sick. There's a New York Times article, I don't know, somewhere around 2005, whenever the movie Walk the Line came out
Yeah,
with Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon.
great movie.
Fantastic movie. And the New York Times, and all their brilliance, came out with an article that basically said Rick Rubin made Johnny Cash. And I cannot double middle finger anything any harder than I did that article. Rick Rubin did not make Johnny Cash. Rick Rubin was lucky to ride the success. Johnny Cash gave Rick Rubin cachet. That's the way that went. And that article can pound sand. Whoever wrote it can pound sand. Rick Rubin can pound sand for his name being used in the article. Like, Johnny Cash is a legend in and of his own right. And to me, this is a theme. Uh, to me, it's another instance of the poor Southern, it can't be success based on his qualifications or his talents. It's got to be because someone from the enlightened area made him. So anyway, it's not Rick Rubin's fault, but he's a benefactor of my bone to pick with that article.
I could spend an entire episode on stories and the stories that Rick Rubin has crafted over time, and whether they're plausible, whether they're hopeful, whether they're real, or but it starts to get out of control because when you look at everything as a story, and you start to feel like you have to peel back the onion at all times, and that everything is carefully crafted for your consumption as a story consumer or as a story reader. We're not far from just having my whole worldview, my whole mind implode in desperation of what's real and what's pretend, which is a great subject for stories. And there are a lot of good movies, which is my preferred storytelling avenue about
So
about not being able to trust anything.
I go on like a 2-minute rant about a New York Times article, Johnny Cash and Rick Rubin, and you just blow right past that. No thoughts.
How did I blow past it? You
You
got a
didn't.
storyteller. You have a storyteller at the New York Times. If you're even bothering reporting on what happened to Johnny Cash, or like the whole point of, I haven't read the article, but the whole point of an article like that is, look at this story I found and then retold. And because it's reporting on a musician and the trappings of the music industry, it can just be a tale, like the tale is, and the reason you're bothered by the tale is because you feel that tale is a twisting of reality, number one. And number two, you feel like it's disingenuous. And number three, you feel like it's basically a false narrative, and that there's a different narrative that is the true narrative. And now we're into an existential battle between Terry from Kentucky, Rick Rubin, Johnny Cash, and an as yet unnamed
New York Times
writer at the
reporter.
New York Times circa 15 to 20 years ago.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
It's a struggle.
Yeah.
So where do you get your story? I'm just going to repeat the question.
Where do I get my stories?
Where do you get your stories in a way that resonates with a normal person's reading of where stories come from? I don't want to say the M word. Media.
Yeah.
I want to avoid that. Like, you're not sitting around a campfire getting stories told via, a banjo tune and a ballad. I mean, maybe not literally. You're probably listening to records that were made that way.
Get a lot of stories from music for sure. There are folks on Twitter that I follow that are brilliant storytellers. A guy named Walter Kern, Kirn.
They tell the story on Twitter.
Dude, there are some threads written on Twitter that are
A story that are an actual story.
and just perfect, like flawless.
Are they fiction?
Both. Yeah,
Is Walter Curran a fiction writer on on Twitter? Is there character limit anymore, or is that gone?
it's gone.
So if I wanted to type out my novella, my proto Kurt Vonnegut, mega pamphlet, I could just write that on Twitter.
You
Bam.
you could.
Is it considered impolite to call Twitter Twitter still, or is it considered impolite to call it X?
I don't really. Who knows? Yeah. I
I,
just there's a whole thing on Twitter where um like blocking somebody. I guess that's a thing on other social media platforms too. I don't know. But blocking someone is like a punishment or it's a thing. Now, I know I don't interact. I don't write. I just read. So I'm a selfish user of Twitter, but I see this all the time. Like I blocked so and so, and people have opinions about that. It's like, why do you care? Do you really care? Like if somebody blocked me, I would just go about my day. There would be no needing to say something about it or that sort of thing.
it's just two different stories. Terry is telling a story of stiff upper lip and prioritize keep the main thing, and make up a name for somebody that's responding to a block in a comment.
I'm pulling real hard to try to get in the ditch today, and your
Get a name.
discipline is
Get a name.
your discipline is flawless.
I need like Shirlene.
Charlene, who?
Shirlene. I don't even know how to spell a Shirlene, but Shirlene is like, yeah, you blog blah 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 blah.
Yeah,
Like totally taking the bait on some blocking story. And Shirlene has a completely different narrative than you. Her narrative is not, keep a stiff upper lip and keep the main thing the main thing. Her narrative is this is the main thing,
yeah.
and if you give an inch, they'll take a mile. And if you don't stand for anything, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And there's all these other stories that go along with how, I mean, in the West, these are hero stories, right? Like Terry is the individual above it all, not going to get in the fray, going to keep the moral high ground, superhero. Not superhero in the sense that you have powers per se, but in the sense that you are the dignified protagonist. And Charlene is like, I'm out here fighting a holy war as the dignified protagonist of my own story. And all
Yeah.
of our like the one of the things that ties us together culturally is that we tell all our stories this way for the most part. I mean, there are variations, but the nature in which we tell stories tends to be a person, one perspective. That perspective is the protagonist. They're either a good person and they win, or they're a good person who does bad stuff and they overcome adversity. Or occasionally they're a bad person, but like they're not a huge number of wildly popular stories in American storytelling where the bad person is the main character.
Bonnie and Clyde.
Aren't they glorified as good people?
Yeah.
Like just sticking it to somebody.
Yeah. The Thing. Sticking it to the Thing.
Did you ever see this movie? It was either called The Wild One or The Wild Bunch. It's Marlon Brando.
It rings a bell, but I
It's a
haven't seen it.
motorcycle movie from a long time ago, and it's pretty forgettable, except for one line where somebody says it's like a normal straight laced guy, and Marlon Brando's the motorcycle gang. Uh, I don't know, the protagonist and or anti-hero almost, and it's like, what are you rebelling against? And he goes, what do you got?
That sounds like a movie my father would enjoy.
Yeah, but it's all like so. This is I get my stories through movies, a little bit of TV, a lot of video games, which has become a narrative medium in my lifetime. When I was a child, the dot following the other dot to chase the dot to make the dot turn into other dots, like that, there was no narrative to that, and that's shifted in my lifetime.
You have to explain to me how you get stories from games.
I mean, so think about. I saw a movie. I saw a movie in the theater recently. I saw The Boy and the Heron, and it's an animated Japanese movie, and basically every frame of the movie kind of stands on its own as a picture that you could stand there in a museum and analyze and think through what is somebody trying to say here. for every frame of this cartoon. So it's the same medium as Daffy Duck, but it's not like watching Daffy Duck when I go and watch this particular movie. So in video games, it's like every choice of what's on the screen. I'm not saying every game has a meaningful or good or fulfilling story. I'd say it's few and far between. But when it gets it right, it's the choices that you make. Why do you know who Mario is? The video
Yeah.
game character, Super
Yeah.
Mario.
Yeah.
He's regular Mario, then he eats a mushroom and he becomes Super Mario.
I get that.
He gets bigger. He grows with the super mushroom. So Mario's. Why is Mario a plumber? See, the story is incoherent. It makes no sense. It doesn't who cares? And then there was a Mario movie last summer. Also, not a good movie. Just a bunch of colors, cars, characters. It was like shortcut storytelling. It's like, oh hey, there's a character I recognize, and they're gonna blow up a thing, hooray! But it's all animated, so it's not compelling. Like I'm watching, I don't know, Jurassic Park or Independence Day, and I'm seeing like big practical special effects or whatever. So the movie stunk. But
I
there's another video game. There's a game called This War of Mine. This is a game about surviving a siege in the 90s. It was made by these guys, Bosnian guys, I think. And so the game is basically inspired by the siege of Sarajevo. And you are either a man or a couple or a child. And during the night, you need to have shelter in a bombed out building. And during the day, you need to find things to eat and have clean water and have medicine. And the things that are threatening you are bombs exploding at night and all of the other people who are also trying to survive, some of whom are doing bad things. And this was like, I didn't know that much about the siege of Sarajevo. Then I play this game and I'm like, this is some really dark stuff because of what happens to the characters, like the way a character is introduced, what they do as a character, what you do when you're controlling the character, where they are, the flow of daytime becomes nighttime, and every night is terrifying, but not in a horror kind of way, terrifying in a I could die kind of way, like or this was based on people who lived this who also could die, and they had to go through that. So that was a game that was, I didn't play it for very long because it felt super sad and dark and depressing. But then I read like tons and tons of stuff about the source material, and I feel like that's a pretty good example of the game created a world which was based on a reality. It told a story which was made up, but plausible and based on a lived experience of the people who wrote and made the game. And then it inspires me to feel like I've learned a thing and like I've experienced a new thing, and that I have a new little corner of my knowledge that I didn't have before about, what are the parts of the human experience that are universal? What are the parts of the human experience that are, I want to avoid at all costs? What would I do if I was in that situation? How do I avoid getting in that situation in the first place? And then all that stuff, which is exactly the same way I would feel if I was watching a good movie or reading a good book or looking at an interesting painting or analyzing a sculpture, storytelling.
What are your favorite organic stories?
You mean like I walk up to a guy and
No,
they tell
no.
me
I
his
mean
story?
that you're consuming from some source, not from a person, not conversation or interpersonal. But for me, it's sports. My favorite
Oh yeah,
organic
yeah.
stories are sports.
I was going to ask you about that. My question was, how do you feel about storylines in sports?
I love it. I hate the like the ESPN manufactured storylines.
Yeah,
But the in-game organic storylines of this player matches up really well against this player. This is his backstory. This is his backstory. Who wins at that? Because that's what sports are. It's a man, or a person on a person, and who does what they do, who does the thing that they do really well, the best in that moment, repeatedly for the duration of that game over the course of a long season during the playoffs. I love those stories.
I would call that emergent stories.
Yeah. I don't
What
know
do,
what,
do they
yeah.
tell? Do they tell themselves, or do they need to be told by somebody else who's interpreting?
They don't need to be told. And those are my favorite ones. And I've been fortunate enough, a handful of times, big things. I grew up in Southern Indiana. I've made no bones about that. Outside of Bloomington, I'm a huge Indiana University fan. It's where my undergraduate degree is from. They, in 1987, I was a young child, won the college basketball national championship. It was the last time they did, on some wild last second shot or near last second shot by a guy named Keith Smart. Well, I was watching that live because that's religion in Indiana generally, especially Southern Indiana. And I've been fortunate enough to see over the years a handful of those types of storylines live. Even as I've gotten older and rarely watch, I've been fortunate enough to capture, like a couple years back, the Bengals and the Bills, where I think it was, or maybe it was the Chiefs and the Bills. The Chiefs and the Bills played for the AFC Championship game, and it was Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, and there was just it was an overtime win for the Chiefs, and it was this crazy back and forth game. I happened to see it, and I never watch football games, so
You got lucky.
I got lucky, yeah. But that to me is almost as satisfying as anything that there is. I really love those types of stories.
Do you feel like you're putting a story into the action, or do you feel like the story is there
The
and all you
story's
have to
there.
do is watch it?
It's mostly, for me, I'm filling in blanks about how I know life goes. And I'm thinking about the average person has no idea. Yes, athletes are meatheads in a lot of instances. They're not probably great philosophers, or have read, de Tocqueville or a lot of the classics. Some have. But the average person has zero, zero idea the level of renegade and confidence and precision and just the things that go into what Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or LeBron James or Michael Jordan, the things that those guys do in high level competition, the way they can stay focused and stay grounded. I like to fill in. I know how this goes. I played that sport. I played baseball. I also played quarterback. It's what I went to college to do, play quarterback in baseball. I know how that goes. I know how 99.999999999% of people would perform in that situation. And to watch somebody do that, I'm fascinated by. I go back into their story. Like, how did growing up in rural Wyoming did Josh Allen turn out to be? Yeah, he has physical gifts, but what led to him having the mental capacity to do what he just did? I think about the stories because I can relate. I don't have it. I didn't have it. And everybody that I know didn't have it. But how do those people do it, like at the top level, on the biggest stages? That's what I like about those stories. Is it's not just the game, or I don't bet on games. It's not just outcome of the game. It's I always think about what led to that and how excellent these people are at their craft, all the hours of work, and just those things. Those are the storylines that I tell myself while watching those games.
Or is that a very solitary activity?
Creating the narrative while I watch a game.
Well, I mean, I assume that's coming pretty automatically.
Yeah,
It's just you're watching, and then this is how the story plays out as you watch. It's all you can't separate. I'm watching the game from this is the story.
correct. They run in parallel.
And do you feel like if someone was sitting next to you, unless you shared a brain, would you be able to?
I
Would
don't
you be
even
able?
bother.
Yeah.
I don't even bother. I can have conversations, and that was the case with the Patrick Mahomes Josh Allen game. Is I don't even I can have a conversation over a glass of wine or whatever while watching the game, but I don't explain the parallel story or narrative that's running in my head alongside the game. It's not necessary. But
Well, everybody's got their own story that's running in their head, and we're all fundamentally alone in our own minds about that. And yet, we manage to communicate at a different level, which is I got my story, you got your story, and yet we're going to talk about this other stuff. It's maybe
yeah,
like a layer above it, And we acknowledge that we each have our, detailed story underneath, but that's not the place where the common ground is found. It because you can't express that stuff, right? Like it's very difficult to express it. Even just practically speaking, the time it takes for you to process the storyline that you've applied to anything you're watching sports wise, or your interpretation of an artwork or whatever, it would take you weeks to even put that into words
Yeah.
to tell somebody else, when for you it's instantaneous. I
Yeah.
mean, like immediate.
That's the piece that everyone misses. Not to change subjects, but that's the piece that everyone misses with the discussion around AGI or artificial general intelligence is we don't even know what that is with us. It's impossible to say that a computer chip is able to do the same thing.
Well, there's a storyline about how, what is it? What is generalized AI? What's the acronym for this?
AGI, artificial general intelligence.
I feel like there's a whole story. I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, but I do feel like there's a lot of storylines that are related to somebody trying to make money right now based on a story being told.
For sure.
Thanks for the story time. You did a good job.
I came in hot, and you
The only people you offended were jocks today.
by telling almost 100% of them that they're not Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes.
No, by saying that they don't read the classics. I think that's more offensive.
And they could care less. I promise you.
You would know better than I would.
Yeah, I would.
I didn't. I didn't read the classics or be good at sports.
I didn't read the classics when I played sports. I mean, whatever I had to for a class, but yeah.
All right, Terry. I don't know what we're gonna. This is the end of one of one. We're not gonna talk about stories next time. I'm gonna cook something else up.
Well, we have Larry coming up day after tomorrow.
Yeah, we still gotta fill in tomorrow.
Yeah.
I got you. I got a couple ideas percolating up here.
All right.
See you tomorrow.
Have a good day, man.